for you this lesson from Unity of the Keys Spiritual Center.
Good morning, everyone. It's so wonderful to be with you here, coming to you from Minnesota today. As Sherry said earlier, my message this morning is all about forgiveness. Forgiveness is a gift that we give ourselves. I'd like to begin with a little story. One day, a small town radio station decided to interview an 80-year-old woman who had just gotten married for the fourth time. The interviewer asked about her life, a few other questions, and then what her new husband, did for a living. And she said, he's a funeral director. And the interviewer said, wow, what an interesting job. And then he said, do you mind if I ask what your previous husband did for a living? And she smiled and said, well, in my 20s, I married a banker. In my early 40s, I married a circus ringmaster. And then when I was 60, I married a minister. The interviewer said, wow, what interesting choices. And she smiled and said, yes, I married one for the money, two for the show, three to get ready, and four to go. I love to talk about forgiveness. Forgiveness is a big how-to for a life that works. It's also the biggest way to reclaim our inherent innocence. A Course in Miracles tells us that forgiveness removes a block to the awareness of love's presence, which it says is our natural state. And here's Charles Fillmore in something that he wrote called A Sure Remedy. Here's Charles. He said, here is a mental treatment that is guaranteed to cure every ill that flesh is heir to. Sit for a half hour every night and mentally forgive everyone against whom you have had any ill will. If you fear or if you are prejudiced against anyone, mentally ask forgiveness of them and send them thoughts of love. If you have accused anyone of injustice, if you have discussed anyone unkindly, if you have criticized or gossiped about anyone, withdraw your words by asking him or her in the silence to forgive you. Finally, forgiveness is one of Jesus' major teachings. Imagine what would have happened if on the cross, Jesus would have said to those who put him there, I really hate you guys for doing this to me. Instead, here's how the weekend unfolded for Jesus. First of all, at his trial with Pontius Pilate, Pilate said to him, speak up, man. Don't you know that I have the power of life and death over you? Jesus replied, you have no power whatsoever, except that which is given to you by my Father in heaven. In modern day language, that was Jesus saying to Pilate, Pilate, this is all my idea, and you are an extra in my movie. And then, of course, on the cross, instead of hating everybody that put him there, Jesus forgave them all. Ernie Larson, in one of his books, said, the biggest barrier we have to forgiveness is a resistance to feeling good. Wow. That's aligned with mystics throughout the ages who have said the biggest addiction people have is our addiction to pain. So once again, here's Ernie. The biggest barrier we have to forgiveness is our resistance to feeling good. Forgiveness of any kind is helpful, but in unity, we have the opportunity to join Jesus in a deeper kind of forgiveness. I call it transformational forgiveness because it's based on knowing our divinity, including our divine power of creation. Here's the old way of forgiving people. And this comes from what A Course in Miracles would call our ego mind. And remember, our ego is who we believe we are when we feel separate from God and other people. So here's that way of forgiving. You did hurt me, and I was your victim. But I, being the more spiritually advanced of the two of us, now deign to forgive you, you jerk. Otherwise, I'd be stooping to your level. Do you know that way of forgiving? I know I do. Transformational forgiveness is a three-part process. The first step is to fully feel the hurt and anger that we experienced. I love this quote by Dr. Todd Davis, Dr. Davis is a psychiatrist and a student of A Course in Miracles. And he said this: I will not suppress my angry feelings. This is the single most important part of forgiveness because it is the key to it. Then he continued, how can I forgive someone I never felt free to blame? So, he said, I will think of blame as a stepping stone to my forgiveness. Not including this step is an attempt at what some of us in Unity call an attempt at a spiritual bypass, which means basically trying to bypass our emotions and especially our anger. And I can tell you from personal experience that doesn't work very well. Most of us as children learned to not feel or express our anger. Our parents didn't know how to express anger appropriately. And when I say appropriately, here's what I mean. I mean to express anger by yelling into a towel or beating a bed with a tennis racket. Well, our parents didn't know how to be appropriate with their anger, so they couldn't teach us how to do that either. Instead, we learned to act it out by getting even. I know for me, as I think back to my childhood, I'd have to say that my favorite way of getting even was to go on what I call a slowdown strike. And when my parents would ask me to do something as a chore, I would take 2 or 3 times as long as I needed to do it. And if someone said, why aren't you getting this done faster? I'd say, I'm doing it. As an adult, I'm not proud to say that my favorite way of getting even was to give people the silent treatment, which is fairly devastating if you're on the receiving end of that. Here in Minnesota, one point about 40 years ago, I think it was, we had a governor named Jesse Ventura, who was a former professional wrestler. And I still remember Jesse saying, I don't get mad, I get even. And he said it very proudly. And I remember thinking to myself, why would that be something to be proud of? Everybody who doesn't get mad gets even. The problem with getting even is that we're still suppressing our anger, which means it's still harming our bodies and getting in our way. Also, our deepest beliefs and emotions are constantly creating our experience in life. And what that means as far as our anger is concerned is that if we don't let ourselves feel it and express it, we continue to attract angry people and things that will bring our anger to the surface. Things like road rage or having children in our presence who are acting out their anger or screaming in an airplane. I was thinking back as I was preparing this message about a time when my first wife and I lived in Lee's Summit, Missouri in an apartment. Lee's Summit is right next door to Unity Village. And I remember coming home in the evenings and walking by the next door neighbor's apartment, and many times, maybe even most of the time, They were yelling at each other, having this big fight. And I remember thinking to myself, thank God I don't have that kind of anger. Well, at that point in my life, I had no idea that everybody in my life was my mirror, for one thing. And so for me, it wasn't that I didn't have that kind of anger. I just didn't know it yet. The second step in transformational forgiveness is reclaiming our power of creation by knowing, just as Jesus did, nothing in my life happens to me. All my experiences happen through me. I'm going to say that one more time, just half of it, and then ask you to repeat it back with me. The first part is this: nothing in my life happens to me. Together? Nothing in my life happens to me. Second part: all my experiences happen through me. Together? All my experiences happen through me. And they happen through me because there's a gift that I want from each one of them, even the ones that feel painful. I also remembered as I was working on this message that when I left Key West after being there for 6 years, my next assignment was as a 1-year ministry, a transitional minister for a ministry in another city. So I was there for a year. Well, after about 2 months being there, I became aware that there was a board member there who just simply did not like me. It seemed like I couldn't do anything right as far as she was concerned. So I asked the board president, what is it with this woman and me? She doesn't seem to like me at all. And he said, well, actually, Phil, she hasn't liked you since before you got here. Before you came, she said, I have a bad vibe about that guy. So I went inside and asked Spirit, what's my guidance here? And the guidance I heard was to ask myself, what does this situation remind me from my past, especially from my childhood? And what occurred to me was, I'm the sixth of 7 children. And by the time I was born, both of my parents were alcoholics. And I decided early on that their life had gotten worse because I was born. So the other decision about that was, I am guilty for being born. I'm guilty for being here. Well, that's exactly what this board member in Houston was saying. She didn't even know me and, thought I was wrong for being there. So part of my guidance was, every morning in my meditation time, I would take time to forgive my mom, my dad, and myself. My mom and dad for whatever thoughts they had about that they didn't want me being there, and myself for believing that I was guilty. After about 3 months of doing this every day, our relationship, my relationship with that board member began to change dramatically. And by the time I left, we had a very loving relationship with each other. The third step in transformational forgiveness is to practice correcting old mistaken decisions we made about ourselves. Decisions like, I'm guilty for being here. We do this so that we don't have to bring situations into our life to bring the old beliefs to the surface, as I did with that board member. Stuart Emery, who was one of the pioneers of the transformational movement in the United States in the 1970s and 80s, in one of his books said, it's not the long ago events that made us crazy. It's the decisions that we made as a result of those events. That's what made us crazy. How do we correct these old decisions? We do that through affirmative prayer. My affirmation, it's been really important in my life. I'm going to ask you to join me in knowing it out loud because I believe it could be good for everybody to know this. The affirmation is this: Everything gets better when I show up. Together, everything gets better when I show up. That is literally true for every single one of us. Debbie Ford, in her book, The Dark Side of the Light Chasers, tells a story about a woman named Janet, who at the age of 66 came to one of her 5-day workshops because she was having recurring throat polyps and believed that they probably had some kind of an emotional component. Well, as Debbie worked with her, she found out that Janet had grown up in a household where her father said, nice girls do not get angry, and nice girls do not raise their voices. Janet had not raised her voice for 60-some years. And as to what happened in the workshop, I will let Debbie tell you in her words. She said, for 5 days in that workshop, we yelled and cursed. Cursing had also been forbidden for Janet, so she had never allowed herself to do that. Then the moment came when she said the F word. What a release. Janet's whole body shook. The entire next day, she walked around with a huge grin on her face. It had taken every ounce of courage she had to do this work, even though her father was long dead. 6 months later, Janet was feeling great and her throat was completely clear. She was expressing herself joyfully and she had finally made peace with her father. Her throat polyps were a wake-up call. They weren't there as something that was there to harm her. They were there to give her a gift. When we know that we invited the events and people by whom we feel victimized into our life, we can say with Jesus, you are an extra in my movie. And continue by saying, I asked the universe to send you to me so I could heal a mistaken decision I had made about myself in the past. Like my decision, I'm guilty for being here. So I ask you this morning, is there anyone in your life with whom forgiveness is not complete? If so, I invite you to bring that person to mind. Step 1 in transformational forgiveness, and I'm going to repeat what Dr. Todd Davis said. I will not suppress my angry feelings. This is the single most important part of forgiveness because it is the key to it. And then he continued, how can I forgive someone I never felt free to blame? So I will think of blame as a stepping stone to forgiveness. So that's step 1. Step 2 is to accept your divine power of creation. Again, I'm going to say something and I'm going to affirm it and then ask you to join with me in affirming it out loud. Here's the statement. Everything that happens in my life happens through me, not to me. Together? Everything that happens in my life happens through me, not to me. And I invite you to know with me regarding this person, you are an extra I ordered from Central Casting because there's a mistaken decision about myself that I want to correct. Once again, like that board member and my decision about being guilty for being here. So that's step 2. Step 3 is practice correcting the mistaken decision through affirmative prayer, like everything gets better when I show up, or an affirmation that works better for you or is the right one for you, like I am completely lovable, or I am more than good enough, or I am always worth listening to. Jesus taught us to practice forgiveness. How many times? Did anybody remember? 70 times 7, right? Which means nonstop. Why? Why did he teach us to do that? So that we could be good people? So we could be moral? So we could earn God points? Not at all. He taught us to forgive so we can stop hurting ourselves. He taught us to forgive so we can release the past. He taught us to forgive so we can reclaim our inherent innocence. And he taught us to forgive so we can have the abundant life we deserve. Transformational forgiveness is a powerful way to have more of an experience of our divinity, as well as more inner peace and more abundance of every kind. Forgiveness really is a gift that we give ourselves. Namaste.